I have made so many takes of this video, you don't even know. Hi guys, Ray from Whimsical Pictures here, bringing you my first ever book review of The Vegetarian by Kang, and translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith. This book made the rounds on BookTube last year after winning the Man Booker International Prize, and I've had a vague interest in it ever since. But the recent release in English of Kang's newest novel, Human Acts, as well as booktuber Unmanaged Mischief's recent review of this book, made my interest much more acute. So when I saw it at the used bookstore, I had to grab it and read it immediately, and I actually had to stop myself from devouring it all in one sitting because I had to go to bed so I could get up and work the next day. So, needless to say, I loved this book, and it gave me a ton to think about, which made me think that it would be a great place to sort of hop back into the wonderful world of reviewing, because I have not had the confidence to make a review video since my first couple of videos on this channel. So, yeah, without further ado, The Vegetarian tells the story of a young woman and housewife named Yang-hee who, after being plagued by violent and grotesque nightmares, chooses to go vegan in a small act of independence. The most noticeable thing about this book, at first glance, is that although it's ostensibly telling Yang-hee's story about a personal choice that she's making, we never once get her perspective. Instead, the book is split into 3 60-page novellas from the points of view of those around her, who are witnessing her choice and slow descent into apparent madness. The first section is from the perspective of her husband, the second from her brother-in-law, and the third, the only female perspective that we get, that of her sister In-hee. This structure is the novel's most frustrating and brilliant stroke of genius. The novel to me is primarily a dark and haunting allegory for one woman's struggle to find some shred of agency in a society that denies her that, and looks down on her for failing to follow the crowd. So seeing her choice and its consequences not from her perspective, but the perspectives of those around her who are judging her actions, emphasizes just how little agency she really has in her own situation. Like many other readers, my understanding of this structural choice from a thematic perspective really bumped up against my desire as a reader to see Yang-hee's point of view and understand her actions. But I wasn't necessarily frustrated by this feeling. Instead, my desire to understand Yang-hee from her own perspective, instead of through the biased eyes of her family, led me to search deeper and deeper within the text, lapping up every vague insight into her mindset that she allows us. And since she's mostly responding to the horrific nightmares that have become more real than reality for her, the most fascinating result of this search for me as a reader was the way that Yang-hee's dreams change form and subject matter with each shift in point of view. And because I'll be talking about each novella in turn, there will be some moderate spoilers from here on out. So if you would like to not hear those, just know that I do recommend this book, especially if you are, like me, a fan of surrealism and allegorical novels. In the first segment, we follow Yang-hee's husband, who is quick to turn violent and domineering when she fails to live up to his expectations of what a housewife should be. Her choice to go vegan and unwillingness to prepare him meals with meat in them shake up the entire foundation of the life he expected to lead, and he contacts her family to set her straight. Her patriarchal father, similar to her husband, is quick to use violent force to assert his will. Her dreams reflect that masculine aggression and violence, recurring scenes of human violence and subjugation of lesser animals, cannibalism, and her own bloody face reflected in the water. She gives up meat so as not to participate in this form of domination over those considered lesser, having experienced so much of it in her own life. In the second segment, we follow Young Hee's brother-in-law, a failing video artist who harbors an overwhelming and frankly creepy desire for his sister-in-law after dreaming up an image of her naked body blossoming with flowers. This desire is born from a very literal objectification of her, turning her into a literal art object and placing her on a pedestal for viewing as a reflection of the eye of the artist who filmed her, rather than as a human being in her own right. I find it particularly interesting that his lust for her comes from learning from her sister that she still has her Mongolian mark, an area of darker pigmentation on the skin of darker-skinned babies, which usually fades in early childhood. With this little detail, his lust emerges directly out of infantilizing her, imagining her as someone somehow more childlike and worldly because she still has the mark of an infant. When Young Hee describes her dreams in this segment, she too describes flowers, seeming to revel in the idea of becoming an object, of giving up her own thoughts completely, unable to think or feel. And in the final segment, we follow Young Hee's sister, In Hee, who, still reeling from her husband's actions in the second segment, commits Young Hee to a mental hospital deep in the woods. She struggles between her envy of her sister's bold choice to shirk the social conventions she still feels trapped by, and her desire for her sister to stop being a burden and return to normal life. In Hee describes the oppressive height of the trees surrounding the hospital, mentioning that they're too tall even to hang oneself on, while Young Hee describes dreams of standing on her head and becoming one of them, her hands sinking into the earth to root, and her legs growing into branches. For In Hee, the trees... In Hee is really hard to say, and I'm sure it's not even remotely correct. I'm sorry. But for In Hee, the trees seem to represent both the watching eyes of society and the savage freedom of a wilderness too dangerous to escape to. And she expresses frustration that Young Hee has found something in them that she can't see. The pull quote on the back of this book from Alexandra Alter mentions a cursed madwoman from classical myth, and that was an archetype that I was reminded of throughout the book as well. Kang cleverly borrows a classic mythic figure who is so often denied any form of agency or individual thought or motivation, often serving as a metaphor for other characters, actions, and feelings, and gives us a fully formed and complicated character, responding with tragic realism to a society which fails to see her as anything but a soulless archetype. This book didn't necessarily give me new things to think about with regards to the oppression of women or the marginalization of the mentally ill, but it did give me a new thesaurus of symbols through which to interpret the feelings surrounding these issues. And as someone with a tendency to find more truth in metaphor than in the mere transliteration of events, I found a lot of value in that. This book is beautifully written, haunting, and weird in all the best ways. I gave the book 4 stars out of 5 on Goodreads. Thank you for watching, and happy reading!